So welcome to the first of our 3 webinars hosted by Holly Beckett. The topic is staying calm through COVID. So Holly's kindly agreed to do a series of 3 workshops for us. Holly undertook her Nuffield Scholarship in 2015, where she looked at practical tools for personal and team development and gained sponsorship from the Frank Parkinson Agricultural Trust. Holly, in 2016, introduced a program based on mindfulness tools and goal-setting techniques, which to help farmers and the rural sector. She ran a pilot study to measure and observe what benefits these practices bring to farmers and agricultural sector workers, and found that the results were extraordinary and consistent. These showed, on average, a 20% increase in purposeful focus, a 25% increase in positive state of mind, a 26% increase in self-discipline, and a 19% reduction in stress. So that's enough from me, and over to you, Holly.
Thank you, Charlotte. So welcome everybody. It's great to see such a good turnout, and some of you may have seen the interview that we held with 3 Nuffield scholars who have also been focus farmers for a number of years, and that was entitled Crisis is a State of Mind. And our state of mind is the only thing that we really have the ability to have full control of in our lives. And it's taken me a number of years to really get to grips with this, but I've taken a number of years to be trying sharing it. And so it's not just for myself, as Charlotte said, we've got lots of evidence from the rural sector that this is really effective for personal development, for farmers driving forward their businesses, gaining true leadership in their lives, not just in the business, but in their whole lives. So I'm getting to grips with presenting online, and usually if I'm in front of an audience, I will start by setting a challenge, which is no different today. And the challenge for you today is to actively listen to this presentation. And when I first came across active listening, it was at a mindfulness and emotional intelligence conference based in New York, when I was on my Nuffield studies. And as the presenters were explaining what active listening was, I couldn't tell you what they said at all, because what I heard was, wonder what all this mindfulness is about. Do you think it's for hippies and weirdos? Well, it's people here seem kind of normal people, normally dressed. And then the presenter said something that did capture my attention. He said, quite often when someone else is talking to us, we are rarely just solely listening to them. We're also listening to the self-talk, the chit-chatter that is going on in our minds. For me, that was all the time. I actually started then hearing, well, of course, you can listen to 2 things at once and you must be brilliant because you can multitask. And then I heard, well, you're always being told you don't listen. So I did the exercise. And the exercise is that whilst I'm talking, or whoever may else be talking on this presentation, try and focus on just what they're saying. These thoughts will come through our mind. We have 70,000 thoughts every day, and it is our choice whether we engage with them or not. So you can just notice the thought, not engage, refocus. So challenge set. So the title of this workshop is Stress Begins in the Mind. And I'd like everybody to get involved, or whoever's comfortable to get involved, and perhaps just start putting in the chat, what are the things that causes you stress? What in our everyday lives is happening? Major things, minor things. I'm hoping a few things will appear in the chat if I can see them. This is where my functionality fails me at the moment. Where is my chat? There we go. So we're starting to get family causes stress, conflict at work, to-do lists that never get done completely, my perception of other people's expectations of me. I think that that is a huge stress factor for many, many people. Work pressures, work. My husband just said over my shoulder, children. Those beautiful, precious people in our lives that we've chosen to bring into the world, and they just cause us stress. New farm business just about starts, and new ventures, managing multiple projects, filling in grant forms. Yeah, perhaps the other end of where those grant forms are going, I think, is pretty stressful. Mountains to climb, Russ, thank you. Metaphorical ones or real ones. I'm a mountaineer in my spare time, and that can be quite stressful. That's brilliant. Thank you for everybody getting involved. So many, many factors in our lives are causing stress. And there's quite a few ways that we can recognize this in our body, in our mind, in our emotions, in our behavior. Can somebody just give me a nod? Is this screen all working well? You can see that. Brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte. So in our body, we might experience headaches, we might get frequent colds, infections, fatigue, we're feeling tired a lot. We might get breathlessness and chest pains, which can be a worry about what other things they might be. And on a very serious level, stress is related to coronary disease and cancers. The World Health Organization states that the biggest killer in the Western world in the 21st century will be stress. Not serious stress either, low level everyday stress. In the mind, we might be worrying a lot, get brain fog. I hear that from a lot of farmers. Can't sleep properly, have trouble making decisions. And I think, again, on a worst case of when we're not at our best, we have this perception that life is just not going to improve and it's not going to get better. Emotionally, we might feel less confident than normal. We could be irritable. We can get quite angry, actually. I don't think I've got that on there. We feel alienated. We feel everybody's against us. And behaviour, more accidents. This is always a bit controversial, but I would say that accidents, in 99% of cases, accidents don't just happen. We're not paying attention. Lack of appetite or overeating, drinking, smoking, drug taking. We're basically trying to blank out these feelings and find the things that can make us feel good, which there can be a healthy side and an unhealthy side. So when we're stressed, what is actually happening in the body? So we will be getting our heart rates increasing, our blood pressure is rising, we get increased cholesterol in the body, which obviously leads to ill health. Our digestion system cannot be working properly, our immune system goes down, hence all those coughs, colds, and extra infections we can get. Cortisol, which is a hormone, the stress hormone produced in our brain, is can be consistent if you're constantly stressed, and that's really damaging. In our cells, we have these tiny little things called telomeres, which are almost like biological clocks, and cortisol reduces our telomeres and shortens them, so it causes an aging process. But as we go through this workshop, I'll be sharing some tools which actually repairs your telomeres. It lowers libido, which is decrease sperm count as well for men, menstrual cramps for women, and over time can weaken bone density. So that's all the stuff that's going in our body, Joy. And mentally, so stress actually shrinks our neural networks. So this huge, vast amount of networks that we've got in our brain, when we're stressed, these networks actually start to shrink and contract, hence the things like brain fog or not being able to make decisions or decisions as easily. So why do we have this stress response? Evolutionary psychology would say that back in the day when we were cave dwellers and we were hunter-gatherers, we had one mission for each day, and that was to go and find food and make it back to camp alive. So we needed to be prepared for if we were to be jumped on by a man-eating tiger or a woman-eating tiger or a bear-eating tiger. And we needed to keep the attentional spotlight, which is in our brain, ready and active to fight or run away. So if this happened to us, the stress response would be activated, and we were either going to fight this tiger or we were going to run away from it, or now there's a sort of understanding of it's fight, flight, or freeze. We might freeze and then we're completely indecisive. And that is what I've just explained in terms of the stress response, exactly what it is this fight, flight, or freeze mode. And it's activated by an area in your brain called the amygdala, which sits just behind the ear in the brain. So what we're seeing here in terms of a bodily response is that if you've got to fight this tiger or run away, your heart rate is increasing to push more blood around your body so that the blood can get to your limbs, and they're either going to be ready for having that fight or ready for running away. To allow that blood to run quicker around your body, a fatty residue is produced to slicken the arteries and allow that to run round. Your body doesn't need to be worrying at this point about digesting food, so the digestive system becomes reduced, and it certainly doesn't need to be at this point in time worrying about making your immune system active and healthy, so that starts to reduce. The cortisol is, as I say, the hormone which is kind of kicking this all into action. It's what gives us that sort of butterfly or adrenaline feeling, and XYZ. The other things are more around this continual stress response. And mentally, if we're fighting or we're running away, and have you ever been in a fight? I'm sure you haven't, but we don't have to think logically. We don't have to think clearly. We're literally just focused on that one moment. So our brain network does not have to be flowing as freely. So ultimately, if we've got that function, and it was to keep us alive, it was a protection function, and it obviously did quite well because we're all sat here today. But there needed to be an opposite state that we were in. And so ultimately, evolution has seen to it that we're actually wired not to pay things much attention, because we need to be saving this attentional spotlight for if danger occurs or we feel threatened. So for the rest of the time, whilst we were going out hunter-gathering, our mind would be wandering, and it would be wandering all over the place, designed to not really focus in on anything at all. And quite often it would be somewhere in the past, something that had happened before, or then something in the future, thinking about something that could or might happen, or, oh no, back in the present moment, there's a lovely flower, and doesn't that smell nice? Or I can hear the birds, oh, and then we're back in the past again, or in the future. And ultimately it's led to us having these 70,000 thoughts that are flying through our mind each day, many of them that we had the day before, and many of them actually in the unconscious mind. It's just that our conscious mind becomes aware of some of them. We have many distractions these days, many distractions. Life is not as simple as it was. And I don't know what it's like for you all here, but speaking to much of the farming community with what's going on with COVID and the global lockdown, I've come across two camps of people. One camp is extremely distressed and stressed by what's going on. And the other is actually really relaxed. And I'm in that camp. What's relaxed? Questionable, but loving lockdown. I'm really enjoying that everybody seems to have a slower pace of life. I'm hearing things like, oh, it's so nice that I don't have to run the kids to every school club and meeting that's going. I'm liking that I don't feel the pressure that I put myself under by wanting to attend all these seminars and workshops, as well as trying to get all the jobs done on the farm. And at the moment, at the busiest time of year, after we've just had 4 months of rain, we're in the UK here, really trying to get on top of stuff. And it's just a little bit more enjoyable. 21st century stress is all around us. As I say, we've got so many more things going on in our lives, and we're wired to be distracted. So we're wired to be looking at all of them and wanting to pay interest in all of them, but perhaps not focused enough to just hone in on a couple of them. And the brain has, in terms of that stress response being triggered, it carries out what's called two-step cognitive appraisal. So when we're faced with something, anything, the first thing that the brain will do is it will say, does this pose a threat to me? If it doesn't, then happy days. If it does, the next question will be, am I up for dealing with it? Now, obviously, our state of mind at this time is going to affect whether we're up for dealing with it at the moment. So this is always a in the time response, something that you may be up for dealing with on one day, you may not be so up for dealing with on another day. But if you feel like, yes, I'm up for dealing with this, then again, happy days. If you're not, then the stress response is triggered. And for many of us, that happens a lot. And as I've just said, when we're not at our best, then we're not up for dealing with stuff so much, and the stress response is triggered. And all those things I've just explained about the body and the mind of the stress response being triggered, it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. But this process also leads us to show why one person's stress is another person's motivation. It completely depends on mood, and it depends on your personality, which we'll come to. So again, another bit of involvement, please. How do you manage stress? See if I can get back to you all. Exercise, that's brilliant. So exercise. Exercising every day, Ian Tremaine? Somebody said not well. Running. How do you manage stress? Badly. Manage stress, talking to people. I think that's a really good one. Getting stuff off your chest. What is it about that you can have something going round and round in your mind, and you're even almost having that conversation with yourself and trying to be logical about stuff. But when you actually voice it to someone else, and sometimes for me, in the midst of voicing it, suddenly another idea comes out, or it's just totally released. I find that very therapeutic, and lucky to have friends that do listen. Me time, yeah, just actually maybe shutting the door on the world and being with yourself. Hula hooping, I like that. Cycle, walking, or a womble. Getting outside. There's something about nature. Very, very lucky in the agricultural community here. I think that's another thing about sort of my circle of influence during COVID, and I do desperately feel for those that are in cities at the moment. Just get my head down and dealing with it and waiting for it to pass. Well, I definitely think it's good to realize that these things do pass. And I think when we're seriously stressed, that can actually be a danger, that logic flies out the window. Cuddling dogs and cats, big one for me as well. I've massively noticed, and again, feel for farmers who are in isolation. And what I've always had a school of thought that it's just the fact that they're ruminating on thoughts and dwelling on things. But I've got actually, you know, my life is still that I'm socially distancing, but there's still people every day. But that actual connection, any dog that is coming my way is getting some super cuddles, and immediately I can feel the difference in my body. I think it's the oxytocin release. So we've got all these ways of dealing and managing our stress, connection, exercise, physical exercise, just getting on with it and waiting for the storm to pass. Can we do these things all the time? Is it always possible for us to get out and exercise? Is it always the case that someone is there that we can talk to in the moment that we need that? So, as I say, some find this controversial, but it's well proven, researched psychology. Stress actually begins in your mind. We have a thought, and that affects our emotions, and we have our emotions, and that affects our physiology. So what's actually going on in our body, the chemicals that are released, and then that in turn affects our behavior. So if those chemicals are the sort of more negative, and hormones are the more negative ones, you know, personally our behavior might become more slumped over, and we're hanging our head down, and or we might be irritable with people, or shouting at people. And of course, they're then going to have a reaction to us. But if we're sort of trapped in this cycle, do we realize that it's our behavior that actually influence that? Perhaps not. So what we start thinking is, well, what's the matter with them? Why have they got such a cob on? Or, oh, well, why are people not wanting to be around me? And the thoughts then affect our emotions and our physiology, and on it goes. And actually, there's a school of thought now that's developing that says that actually it could be the emotion that we have first from all this sort of outside data coming into our body through our senses, and then that affects our thoughts. But it's almost a cycle, and can be a vicious cycle if it's of a negative nature and perception, but it can also be a really positive cycle. If you are at your best in a great state of mind, which is always what I'd vote for. I'm just going to come back to that as well, because there's something that I particularly disagree with. Perhaps it's a good point to bring this up. I often have people say to me, yeah, but we need the bad times, you know, because we wouldn't appreciate the good times, would we? Well, I will ask you this. Whenever you have been at your best, in a great mood, and life is wonderful, have you ever said, oh, do you know what I could really do with here? Could really do with a bad day. Oh, that's just what I need to appreciate everything a little bit more. It's not like that at all. Okay, I hope that active listening is going well for everyone, because this is a lot to take on board. I mean, it's taken me 5 years to get my head around this, so I don't expect everybody to get it in 5 minutes, but we will give it a go. So, from the time we're born, in fact, much research suggests that even in the womb, but once the sort of brain is developing, we are taking in information constantly. And we take these psychological snapshots. So the brain's taking in all its information. Our brain is like a supercomputer. And I'm also talking about how the unconscious or the subconscious mind is obviously taking a lot of that in. We're only aware of what consciously comes into our mind. And out of all that data, there's quite a few very significant things which we'll call psychological snapshots. And from that is where we get a lot of the actions that we learn. You might have heard people talk about learnt behavior. And this could be simple things like, even as a toddler, so research suggests that boys will have the same gait, as in their walk, like their father, and girls will have the same gait as their mother, because we're watching it, we're copying it, and we have learned behavior. And it's, again, emotions as well. Often with the actions and things and experiences that are going on, we have an emotion tied to that. And so we then learn these emotional responses. And as I say, the brain's like a supercomputer, and it's whenever then we're faced with a new experience, it's saying, where have I seen this before? What is something similar that's happened to this before? And at the same time, if it clocks something that is similar in terms of the experience, it'll say, how did I feel about this the last time that similar thing happened? Not the same, but a similar thing. And obviously, if it's a good response, we're going to feel good and positive about that. If it's a bad response, then we're going to push away. I think this is a really good point, because it's only recently that this has dawned on me. Probably one of the biggest challenges I've experienced myself, and also in a lot of farming families, in terms of generational interaction, is this idea of, we've tried that before. Well, you haven't tried what perhaps the new generation is proposing. You haven't tried it in this time, and it's not exactly the same. But perhaps you can understand from the other generation or person in your family or farming business that you're posing it to, is that likely what's happened is they're going back to this time where it didn't work. So it's perhaps surrounded with failure or, and it's not got a great emotion to it, and we're always going to be pushing back. Okay, so we've got psychological snapshots right from the moment in the womb, all of this is happening. And then there's these other two functions that happen. The first is habituation, and habituation starts from 36 hours after we've born. And habituation is that once we have learnt to do something, and our mind believes that we've learnt to do it, which it will think it's done the best way, because all it's trying to do is get it done, it will really stop paying it any attention at all. So it took a lot of concentration and focus when you were first tying your shoelaces as a child, and it took a little while to learn this. But now, how much time do you really spend focusing and paying attention on tying your shoelaces now? Probably very little. The other thing, again, I think that this is really great to be aware of on farm, is all of those tasks and jobs that we do, little everyday things, without really thinking about them and without really thinking if there's a better way. And perhaps cast your mind back. There are some allowances for active listening. Perhaps cast your mind back to when you've been doing a job and then someone's with you and they say, oh, you do it like that, I do it like this. And you think, oh, blimey, actually, that is going to save me 10 seconds every time, which sounds like nothing until you start adding up all those 10 seconds of your whole life. And it's much more effective. The other thing we have is called categorization, and this starts from the first 36 months, so about 3 years of age. And if you imagine in your mind a huge set of pigeonholes in like those hotels where you had those little postal holes that you could put things in, we start to, our own model of our world starts to shape, and we have all these categories. And I guess it makes life a lot easier and more simple. Remember that we're not wanting to focus on anything too much because we're having to save our attentional spotlight for if we were jumped on by this person eating tiger. So anything that we come across, anything new or any person new, we will quickly put them into this category. We'll make snap judgments on who they are, and we'll filter them away with, or this thing away without really paying it much attention at all. Now, these two things come together to basically create for us, and I'm now talking more in terms of adult life. As I say, children are they're like sponges, they're taking everything in. And it's also worth pointing out the timescales of these things. Remember, habituation, you're soaking up information. I think, and I was guilty of this massively with my friends and their children, whilst their babies couldn't talk, probably our chat and our behaviour, there was no limits, and it was only until they started talking that we perhaps curbed that somewhat. Those babies right from the beginning are taking everything in, all that you say and all that you do and how you are acting and behaving, and they are learning from that. But these two things come together and they create what's called, known as automaticity, our automatic pilot. So we go through much of our day on automatic pilot, because we're busying ourselves, saving our attentional spotlight for if there's a threat or something that we perceive as danger. How many times have you arrived home in the car and thought, I don't even remember the last 5 minutes of that journey? But what you do remember is the really cool thought that you were having in your head of your new business venture and how this was going to go or how that was going to go, or possibly the disastrous thought that the grass wasn't going to grow this year because we were going to be in drought, and suddenly you've lost your farm and everybody's out on the street. So how do we make sense of now? We are basically huge receptors. Well, it's huge, you know, a big receptor. We see at certain frequencies, we feel, hear, gain certain wavelengths, smell and taste. We've got millions of bits of data coming into us all the time. And then that goes through what is known as our stored knowledge. And the stored knowledge is made up of the psychological snapshots that we have had, all of that data that has previously been taken, the categories that we've built in, excuse me. And then, so that gets filtered through our stored knowledge. And what we do is we delete and we distort it, the actual information coming in, and we generalize about it. And what we're then left with is our perception of reality, our version of reality. And this is where our personality is. And this is why you can have identical own personality, children in the same family, very much different personalities. And I would encourage, if one of the things that I looked at on my Nuffield travels was personality profiling, and this was such a great way to start understanding this, a little bit about yourself, a bit more about yourself, and definitely about others. And I always recommend 16personalities.com. It's free, it takes about 30 minutes to do, and I'll share that resource with you at the end. So, the central executive. This is pretty much this attentional spotlight that I've been talking about. And it also is very, very active in children. So the attentional spotlight, when children are this soaking up everything, learning new things, learning ways and new ways of doing things. It is very, as I say, very, very active. But in adults, it's not active not active at all or very little. As adults, it will kick in at in times like when we're learning to drive. So it's quite a complex task, it's new, we really have to pay attention. But as I said earlier, probably everybody's had the experience of that by the time you've been driving for a while, it becomes automatic again. We're not paying it that much attention. And your central executive is also responsible for coordinating everything else in your mind, of doing what it needs to do when it needs to do it, to get what you want done. And this is going to feature through the whole of this series, through to next week around mental training and how that achieves results, and then also on to vision being essential for success and goal setting. So the central executives, as I say, rarely active in adults, because unless we're doing something very differently, like driving a car or learning a new language or learning a new instrument, it's not particularly activated. I'm going to leave it at that depressing point there, but I do have a few exercises for you to choose from this week, and it's completely and utterly your choice. I guess my values around setting up Focus Farmers is to share this information with everybody, but absolutely what people do with it is their own choice. Their life path is their life path, and as we've heard me talking about just now, everybody is different, people aren't the same, and they need to work out what's right for them. This is about true self-leadership, and that means making your own decisions. But here's a few things you might want to try. Doing everyday things differently. As we just heard, the central executive activates when we're doing things in a different way. So getting dressed in the opposite way. If we go back to habituation, you will get dressed in the same way all the time and you don't pay it any attention. So you'll put your left leg in first or your right leg in first, and the sock on one foot and then sock on the other. So the first task is actually one day noticing that which way you get dressed, and then the challenge will be the next day getting dressed in the opposite way. Let's see how, if you choose to do this one, how many days it takes you to get dressed before you remember to actually pay attention and you don't get dressed and think, oh, okay. But you just let go and go again for the next day. Brush your teeth with your other hand. Kind of infuriating, but just go with it slowly. Move the tea or coffee jar in the house. This is a good one because just notice how many times you actually must go to that usual cupboard before you remember. How much are you actually paying attention to your own life? How much are you really turning up to what's truly going on. Start to notice your thoughts. Remember this cycle of thoughts, emotions, physiology, behavior. And some of those thoughts are really, as I say, there's 70,000 thoughts to just distract us. And some of them are very, very pointless and a little bit abusive sometimes. And I just want you to think sometimes when you've got a bit of self-talk going on, would you actually talk to a friend the way you're talking to yourself? Are you repeating yourself? Because if you've had some kind of concern, absolutely, concern is a very real thing. But there's, well, basically three things you can do about it, as my mom would say. You can live with it, you can change it, I take action, or you can walk away. Thinking about it over and over and over again is not going to help. And all it's going to do is trigger that stress response in your body and your mind. Again, this next one is the same. Is it helping anybody? We can all have concerns about friends and family and, as I say, what's going on in this current situation, and people who are having to deal with a lot of tragedy and grief. But thinking about that over and over again is not going to help them. And finally, I would encourage everybody to do this, a selective attention test. There's a link there, again, we'll share the presentation with you. And it's 82 seconds of your life, which I think might just reveal something about your own attention. And we can talk about that, hopefully, when you join us for the session next week. And my final question, rhetorical, how was the active listening?